Jaden Nixon bounced back in game 2, but is he catching up to Myles Montgomery?
You are Locked On UCF, your daily podcast on the UCF Knights, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Come on in to Locked On UCF, your daily UCF podcast. I'm your host, Mike G. Thank you so much for making us your first listen of every day. Turn us on, turn us up. We'll turn it out. I'm here with my good friend, Andrew Gluco, senior writer at UCFKnightZone.com, and talk a little UCF football on today's show. Andrew, we're going to talk about that UCF run game and one Jaden Nixon. We thought they could have a two-headed monster at running back, but Jaden Nixon having the showing we thought he might have in game 1, in game 2. Then we're going to do a little QB update and end the show talking about a little controversy on Twitter with some voting. Let's start at the top. Jaden Nixon had a pretty good game 2, showing off what we had heard all summer long, that he was absolutely killing it in camp. But is he, like, if you're Scott Frost, do you got to pick a guy at this point? You know, who carries the load? Do you continue to split carries evenly between the two? How do you manage your running back room while making sure that you share the load, but you also go with the high hand?
Oh, I mean, you still start with your script. We always, have coaches come out with a script early on of like, these are the plays we're going to run. And then based on what we're presented, we change our philosophy and our strategy. That's what the coaches go into a game thinking. I don't think that's going to change. Myles Montgomery is your primary running back at this point. And while his numbers have not been great, 29 carries, 114 yards is a 3.9 yards per carry average. It's pretty pedestrian. He's still going to be the guy because we know from what we've seen over the past couple of seasons that Myles is capable of better. And I don't blame the numbers on him. He's more of an inside the tackles runner, and that's been an area of struggle for the offensive line is creating that run block separation that's needed to, help Myles, create some openings and get through. As we talked about before, you don't replace RJ Harvey, who is a smaller guy and was able to basically squeeze through, not large, gaps and be able to turn nothing into something. Myles is, has struggled with that to a certain extent, and the numbers kind of corroborate that. You look at Jaden Nixon's numbers: 6 carries, 150 yards. Well, let's think about that. 2 of those carries were those 2 big plays of over 100. It was basically the entire season was those 2 carries. He had negative yards in game 1, and he had 3 yards on the other 2 carries in game 2. Those 2 runs were to the outside. I mean, you can't use that as a way of saying he is, better off being, getting the lion's share of the carries or even 50%. It all depends on what the defense gives. If the defense is going to, not have good outside containment, let Jaden Nixon run the ball, take him to the outside, let him turn it upfield, find a way to get him outside because he can really break it once he gets into the open field. But against a more competent team, that you're going to see in conference play, a Kansas, a Baylor, a Texas Tech, any of those teams, you're going to have to find a way to make your run game work. And you're going to have to, once you get past those scripted plays, you're going to have to make a judgment call. Do you use, Jaden Nixon more? Do you use Myles Montgomery more? But as far as the near term, I mean, I don't think they're going to change anything because Nixon's inside numbers haven't really changed anything. I don't. So a few episodes back, we saw some comments, how, getting a little upset with us because we were discounting those large runs when talking about the game. This is why, because you don't know if it's a one-time phenomenon or in this case, two-time because of the opponent you're playing with, or if it's something scheme-based that's working. So yeah, you want to try it again. You're going to try it again, but you have to take it at least the first time with a grain of salt. You're playing against a low quality FCS school that doesn't have the size or speed to keep up with your fastest players. Of course, you're going to break it open and something's going to happen if you run to the outside and they don't have the horses to keep up with you. So to kind of put a bow on it is, you're going to follow your script. I don't expect Myles Montgomery to be supplanted as the guy who carries most of that script, but UCF is going to, continue to try to rotate as needed and not have Myles carry the ball, 20, 25 times a game. It's not necessary. Jaden Nixon's going to be involved more. And we saw last week where they tried to get him more. It's just, he kept running it down all the way to the end zone. But if his inside run game is still that ineffective, they're going to have to use Myles Montgomery more.
Well, look, Myles Montgomery still led all those who toted the rock in the rush game with 8 carries. Jaden Nixon's 4 carries for 156 yards and 2 TDs. You mentioned that long of 87 there for Jaden Nixon. And then Jacurri Brown, 5 carries for 106 yards and another 2 TDs on the ground. I mean, he is a dynamic carrier of the rock, is a Jacurri Brown. UCF 11.1 yards per carry versus North Carolina A&T for 356 yards on the ground. Those are good numbers. And if you can produce anything close to that versus a Power 4 opponent, you're going to have a chance to win some football games. But they've got to have balance, Andrew. If this run game, I think what we saw against Charles Kelly's squad, Jacksonville State, is that without balance, this offensive line is not good enough to withhold a complete sellout to stop the run. And so, that's only going to get harder as you get into conference play. So you need balance so that teams cannot sell out versus the run. Because right now it doesn't look like the offensive line is able to stop that if you're playing one-dimensional football.
I was going to say, and that's the thing. That's why the passing game is so important, because use the pass to set the run. Well, if your pass game isn't reliable and it's, not doing enough to make the defense pull back. Yeah, they're gonna keep stacking the run because they know that's where the best players are. But UCF's pass block, their pass protection has been pretty solid. I don't think that gets enough credit. They've bought the quarterbacks a lot of time, sometimes a little too much time, and that can get into a quarterback's head inadvertently. Like, I don't have to rush this, and as a result, there's an errant throw in there because it's a little too easy. But if all you're stuck with is stop routes and comebacks, they're not going to drop everyone back, and you're still going to be dealing with a run-heavy defense. So they're going to have to find a way to make those deep passes work. They struggled with it last week. Was hoping Jacurri Brown would have a little more opportunity to throw the ball, but he chose to run. As we found out, those were option plays essentially, and he chose to run instead of pass against a woefully outclassed defense. So I don't know, man. They're going to have to find a way to get defenses to respect the pass if they're going to hope this run game is going to break out.
As we mentioned, the bye week may be coming in an opportune time for Scott Frost's squad here after those first 2 cupcakes. Now you got North Carolina, and you've got something to prove here. But look, they've still got something to prove at quarterback. And Cam Fancher went out in game 1. What will be his status for North Carolina? We'll talk about that after a quick word from our sponsors. This episode of Locked On UCF is brought to you by our friends at DoorDash. The weekend is almost here, and it's time to look back and crown this week's MVP. Who delivered? Powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash Streaks, saving more every time you order. These players delivered when it mattered most. Let's break it down. For UCF, Jaden Nixon, 4 carries for 156 yards and 2 TDs. He delivered in a big way. When the pressure was on, he busted an 87-yarder, and that's what you want to see if you're a UCF fan. And if you've been watching week after week, was this performance a fluke? Well, we certainly hope not. Jaden Nixon could be on a streak. And just like Jaden Nixon delivered for UCF, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays with DoorDash streaks. You save every Saturday you order, stack it up all season, and you could save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday. Keep the streak alive. Fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Terms apply, promo period through 11/18. That's November the 18th. Get it fast with DoorDash. Scott Frost has not committed to whether Cam Fancher will be available for game 3 here versus North Carolina. However, he went out early enough in the first game versus Jacksonville State that you were able to play Taven Jackson a significant amount. Taven came in, had a good game off the bench for all intents and purposes, and then maybe took a step back here in game 2 versus North Carolina A&T, only going 12 of 21 for 189 yards. Now, I talked about this with James Duncan earlier this week. There were some drops out there. There were some passes that they could have hauled in for him to maybe bump that completion percentage to mid-60s. But look, at the end of the day, if you're Scott Frost, you did not commit to QB very solidly headed into game 1. You left the door open that you could play multiple QBs for the first couple of games. And Cam Fancher, again, we don't really know a status on him just yet, but I've got to think that you've got to stick with Taven Jackson to start North Carolina, maybe no matter what happens here in practice in the lead up to the game.
I'm not 100% sold on that, and I'm going to get flack for that, and that's okay. One of the reasons, if there was a game this weekend, that's one thing. We would heard more updates, and they would have committed some. But you have a whole extra week, so you have the benefit of time. Letting Cam heal. Is he going to heal well enough to even be able to play? This could be a non-issue. Until he's ready to come back on the practice field and go full go. Obviously, Taven Jackson's your QB1, but until you have a settling of Fancher's status, it's still up in the air. I thought Jackson was serviceable when it was short passes that were stop and comeback routes, and I've said that a few times. He struggled when he had to lead the receiver. He had an opportunity to pull away and say, like, here I am QB1. I wasn't convinced by that. And while Fancher's first outing was shaky, his first outing looked, when it came to his deeper passes, weren't much different than Fancher's in game 2. A little overthrow here, slightly off here. It comes back to the fact of there's just not a large selection of video to look at as far as these two as UCF quarterbacks. One's played less than a half, and the other has played a little more than a game and a half.
Or 3 quarters,
yeah. So I mean, there's still a lot of stuff that they see on the practice field that we don't, which is one reason why Cam Fancher got the start. Do I think this overall will help the confidence of Taven Jackson? Yeah. I mean, you were a starter for a game. You came in relief and did a good job as coming in relief. But here's the other thing. Jacksonville State did not game plan for Taven Jackson. That's the thing about the relief pitcher who comes in. You're not game plan for. Look what happened when with Dylan Risk last year. He had the good drive against BYU. They had the garbage time, and there was really nothing to look at. He gets his first start against Arizona and has a field day. Now there's film on him, and every team just rips him apart, and his numbers get worse and worse every single game as time goes on. Now North Carolina is going to have more film on Taven Jackson, who really didn't have a whole lot to begin with, because his playing career has I don't want to say short, but there's not a huge consistent portfolio of work. A little bit here at Tennessee and Indiana, but nothing really consistent. So, could that work to UCF's advantage? Yeah, if he makes the throws. But if he doesn't, then obviously there's a problem. So you're going to have to rely on what happens at practice to make that decision. But it's all moot if Fancher can't play. But with the bye week, he does have the benefit of time to continue to heal.
Yeah, I hear your point. I do think Jacksonville State prepared for the possibility of seeing 2 or 3 quarterbacks because of Scott. They named Fancher the starter, but he made it clear that there's a good possibility you could see multiple quarterbacks in that game. But to your point about not having a lot of tape on Taven Jackson, though, it's going to be I just have to think that the in-game results are going to start to matter a little bit more than what they're seeing. If it doesn't translate from practice to the field, it doesn't do you very much good if you're Scott Frost. And so Fancher had a really rough start to that game 1. Now, could he have caught fire if he had not gotten hurt and they had left him in here? Possibly. I think that's the tough math that you have to do if you're Scott Frost, right? Is unfortunately they won those first 2 games, so you maybe have a little bit of house money to play with here. If you lose to North Carolina, it's not the end of your season. It's not a conference game. You want to win this game, but you certainly can use the data either way, I guess, to try to improve your football team and try to make some better decisions about who is going to be the guy for the rest of the season. At some point, you're going to have to commit to a guy, right? And I'm not a big fan. I mean, he could possibly do the QB carousel thing for the rest of the season. I'm strongly against that.
Me too.
Yeah, and so I hope that's not what we see. Final thoughts on the QB situation before we move on.
This is why the bye week could not have been at a better time.
Yeah,
you get a chance for Fancher to heal and continue to evaluate. Jackson at his post-game press conference was very cognizant that he made a number of boo-boos and is going to be working on and getting better. And part of that is, he just needs to work with these guys more, understand their speed, and the receivers kind of betrayed him a little bit. There were some cat balls that should have been caught that weren't. I'm not saying that they were inadvertently dropped, but there were catchable passes that were not caught, and it made him look worse. But if you're throwing behind, even if the guy touches the ball, he should catch it. You're running full out, and you get to throw behind you. That's tough to bring in. Being a Cleveland Browns guy, being from Cleveland, this past week, I saw, 2 times where the throws were a little bit off. The receiver dives for it, hits his hands, and it gets picked off. These aren't bad wide receivers. I mean, Jerry Jeudy and I think the other was Cedric Tillman are not bad wide receivers. Joe Flacco is not a bad quarterback. He's a little old, but he's not bad. These were just, the timing was a little off, the accuracy was a little off, made for a tough situation. It led to turnovers. So, that's why the quality of the throw is so important. If you lead your receiver a little too far, he's not going to be able to catch it. Or he may dive for it, but doesn't mean he's going to bring it in. Dwayne Thomas bailed him out, bailed Jackson out, getting that catch to the 1 yard line. That was thrown accurately. That's 6 right there.
Yeah.
But that was not an easy catch and easily could have been an incomplete pass.
Accuracy matters, not just for the QBs, but for us in the media too, which takes us to our last segment. There was a little bit of an AP voting controversy that I want to talk about because I think it matters in college football that we talk about these things. So we'll get to that next on Locked On UCF. This episode of Locked On UCF is brought to you by our friends at Mazda. Andrew, Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than just simply drive. Mazda delivers confidence with every ride, with more IIHS top safety pick awards than anyone else since August of 2025. From footwork to breathwork, athletes sweat, all the details. Mazda brings the same intention to how they craft every single model. Like UCF players, we sweat every detail because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda, move and be moved. This episode of Locked On UCF is also brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Yeah, you referenced the Browns. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your first bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet, and if it wins, you win $300 to use across the app. Get in the game with FanDuel. Andrew, one of our peers in the media, Haley Sawyer, I'm going to say her name, Haley Sawyer, had a vote that she had a very controversial ballot this week. And she received some criticism for her ballot. But I did want to talk about this today because I think that what we do matters. Now, as you know, I'm credentialed with multiple college football organizations. You're credentialed for UCF Night Zone and Locked On to go down and cover the games at UCF. That is a privilege that we take seriously. We take our reporting seriously. The universities, the players, the coaches, they give us access, and what we do with that access matters to me. So when you get a chance to vote in the AP, look, man, there was once upon a time the AP was used in the BCS formulation. They removed themselves from that. If they had not been removed, I think they were going to be removed. But the human element in voting has long been criticized. And the College Football Playoff Committee, I think they got it right, Andrew, when they said, we're not going to start ranking until midway through the season, until we have enough data to sit down, put our heads together, watch a bunch of games, and decide what these teams are. The flaw in the process is that in the preseason, these biases that we have that are really based on last year's results. Like, come on, man. Alabama getting railroaded, absolutely ramrodded by Florida State, is about the media thinking that this is still Saban's Alabama. It's not. It's Kalen DeBoer's Alabama. And I've been telling anybody who will listen that this guy, I don't think, gets it. I got to question him at SEC Media Days about how he was going to attack the SEC versus the Pac. And he kind of just told me, like, football is football. I was like, all right, cool. What did he do his first year? He missed the playoffs. I'm tired of Alabama getting the benefit of the doubt here based on what Saban accomplished. And so when you have a media poll that ranks teams in the preseason, you get things like what happened with Haley, because she clearly did not look at the results. And if you haven't been following this, again, her name is Haley Sawyer. She is a beat writer on the Southern California beat. That's USC. There are 62 sports writers and broadcasters that vote in the AP poll. And she works for the SoCal News Group. She was called out because her ballot after Florida famously lost to USF this weekend. She not only had them ranked and did not rank South Florida, she moved them up 2 spots on her ballot. Not as egregious, but still egregious in my book. She moved the Baylor into her top 25 at 25, but did not rank Auburn, who waxed Baylor in their house to open the season. Andrew, I can get over all that because mistakes happen. The problematic thing, we're not going to play it, but the problematic thing was the interview she did after, where she, and I'm going to paraphrase her here, she essentially said, because there are so many that vote, I'm not sure that this matters at the end of the day. I had a lot of problems with that, man. I'm telling you, like I voted in media polls for multiple conferences. I get it. You can't follow every team. I can't tell you who Utah's second string DB is right now. But when we get a chance to vote preseason all Big 12, right? Like I get that it's the most recognizable names that stand out from the programs that have done well most recently on those polls. Anybody claiming that they know who all 20 of the DBs are that we have to vote for, they're full of it. They are. However, right? But I'm not gonna go and say, I'm not gonna go and say, well, you know what? I think Vanderbilt's gonna win the SEC this year. Because it doesn't matter. Come on, man. If you got
but someone did.
Yeah, but somebody did that this year. They voted for Vanderbilt. Haley, look, man, mistakes happen. I think what happened was she was covering a Southern Cal game late, and she didn't really she had to turn her ballot in before the deadline, and she just did not notice that Florida lost to USF, and she shuffled them up. But I do have so I can live with that. I do have a problem with her saying that it doesn't matter when you get the vote. Don't do that to college football fans. These polls matter. We talk about them. It's their articles are written, content is made, debates are had. It matters, man. I'm telling you, it may not be life or death what we do, but I do have a problem with a member of the media who has been granted the limited privilege to vote in that poll to say that it doesn't matter. It matters.
Oh, of course it matters. The AP poll has been awarded a national championship for decades upon decades, back all the way into the 1930s. Even though we have the CFP, the AP still gives they still award a national championship. Yeah, it's going to likely follow the CFP, but none of the polls are actually beholden to what the CFP says. If there was some sort of weird controversy or something, they could award it to somebody else. I mean, it'd be very unlikely. The chance would be infinitesimally small, but they could. There is a non-zero chance that this happens. So to say it doesn't really matter. 1 of 62, that's about 1.6%. Considering the inverse relationship in the voting, 25 points for one, and so down to 1 point for a 25th vote. Yeah, your vote does matter, because if you're voting someone high, you're giving them extra points that maybe they shouldn't have, and it just shows. Not only like the lack of, maybe it's fear. I don't know. Maybe it's fear of me. You know what? I screwed up. I made a mistake. Own it. Move on. And you know what? People would move on. The problem is as you said earlier in the show, it's the doubling down. It's the making this weird word salad excuse of why you're voting the way it is. Oh, I'm not going to talk about my process, because you had no process.
There was no process. Yeah.
There was no process. You guesstimated what things were without actually looking at a box score. Because if you looked at a box score, you would have saw.
There's no way you move them up.
You can't justify that. It's not like, you can't justify, 2 games into the season. Oh, they lost, but most of these other teams won. I'm going to bump them up 2 spots, and then not even consider the team that beat them. Like, South Florida may be the rival school to UCF, but I mean, we have to admit these guys are looking pretty good. Their defense is solid, and they took it to Florida. Now, maybe Florida's a little bit overrated, but they're still ranked where they were, and USF took it to them, and the rest of the voters out there figured this out. Again, if she just admitted that she messed up, it'd be okay. But because she made a mockery of the AP poll, it doesn't really matter, And
Yeah.
there are calls. Yeah, but Mike, there are now calls for her to lose her vote now.
As there should be.
I've never heard of the AP polling a vote mid-year like that, but the fact that she made a complete mockery of the poll, they almost have no choice.
Yeah, as there should be. Look, when I talk about the preseason bias here that certain, members of the media and people have, a lot of folks on the basis that they had a very good team last year ranked Arizona State very highly coming into this season. I was of the
skeptical
opinion,
kind.
Yeah, I was. I'm on record. If you watch this show, I was like, I don't know, man. I don't know about the people calling for them to repeat as champions of the Big 12. And then they go out and they lose to Mississippi State last week, which we universally agree they are a bottom 4 team in the SEC right now. Mississippi State is a bottom 4 team in the SEC. So and the reason I brought that up is because if you look at Haley's poll, instead of dropping them clean out of the top 25 because they were ranked at 12 where they had no business, they're still 25, 24, 23, 22 in her ballot. That's what I'm talking about, man. I'm like, this is why you have to derank and re-rank these teams every single week. And judge them on their merits. I want to close the show kind of talking a little bit about what happened to Florida State headed into that 1 year where they won every game and they got left out, but their quarterback got hurt and he was absolutely carrying them. And then they ended up playing, I think, Georgia in a bowl game, and Georgia absolutely skull drugged them to oblivion. And
it was worse than that.
Yeah, there were a lot of people who said it doesn't matter their body of work during the season. They won every game in a Power 4 conference. They deserve to be in the college football playoff. And then there were those who said, no, they got skull drugged by Georgia. This is exactly why they got left out, right? Like, because they got skull drugged by Georgia. And the committee said they did factor in the injury at quarterback, saying that without that player, their team is fundamentally different. And I mean, look, I see both sides of that argument, but I was happy that at least the discussion was being had here, where it's like, hey, is this a different football? It's the same football team. And it did. It raised a lot of questions. Now, like, they took a lot of heat from that. I think that the committee felt vindication by Georgia winning in the fashion that they did versus Florida State. But I'm looking at this. There are a few people who get to decide essentially what the narratives are. We drive what people think about their teams. The narratives that we choose on this very show, the things that we choose to talk about, become talking points on social media. They drive arguments between family members on Saturdays, or, and maybe I'm giving us a little bit too much credit, but as media, we do have a responsibility when you are given what I think is the absolute honor to vote in a very historic poll that has mattered since the beginning of college football, as you noted at the top of the segment, that you take that seriously, and and hopefully the learning that she takes away from this is that it would have been better to say nothing at all, because like I said, I don't know if it's the worst AP ballot I've ever seen, but the comment after certainly made it seem worse, because those guys had the good sense to just be quiet about their terrible ballot. And she got on here and just, man, I mean, I think she set the media as a whole back a little bit in the perception of, you may cover the team, but do you know football? Do you know what you're talking about? Are you paying attention? If you weren't going to at least put the minimal effort in, which would have been to just look at the box score and see that Florida got lost to an unranked team, then don't take the vote. Don't accept the honor. Let somebody else do it who thinks that it does matter, and that, like, votes like it should matter.
Well, I don't think it's set back the media at all, because her comments kind of put her in a vacuum, compared to everybody else. You look at the numbers of the votes and everything, and while there were others who had Florida in the mid-teens. She was 14th, but there was a 15th, there was a 16th, there was a 17th, there was a single voter in each one. Those became a little bit of a statistical outlier. The majority got it right. The majority figured it out. There was a few at 25, most were unranked. And so the system did shake out. But again, it comes back to the comments. I want to go back just a little bit to something you said. You were talking about, Florida State, getting locked out of the college football playoff. The funny thing is that's the exact same thing that happened to UCF in 2018. McKenzie Milton gets hurt in the regular season finale against South Florida. That completely changes the dynamic of the team. The DJ Macklin, had the cheat codes in and had an outstanding game against, Memphis in the conference championship. But I mean, let's be real. He was not a good quarterback. He just had an amazing game, but the rest of his, his work was not impressive. Yeah. And the committee took that in consideration when they kind of dogged UCF in the rankings. The only difference in this argument is Florida State was a power conference, champion. And granted, they didn't look good in their conference championship game. They kind of, they won, but they didn't look good doing it.
No.
But as it's the same argument as Auburn in 2004. As a power conference champion, they felt there was, we're a power conference champion. We deserve to be there, which is why the system has been changed. And these mistakes, I don't maybe not mistakes so much, but controversial decisions have added up over the years and have helped develop where we are now, so that these situations can't happen again. If you're a power conference champion, you go undefeated, you're getting in. They've already made automatic ways to get in, and Florida State would have been in under this new system. So in this case, it's one of those cases of, these schools had to walk so that the CFP could run.
Yeah, one of the things to note about that 2004 Auburn team is that you got to remember the year before they opened with USC at home, and they got beat 23-0 in their own house. Auburn did. And when it came time, there were 4 undefeated teams at the end of that 2004 season, right? USC, Oklahoma, Auburn, and Urban Meyer's Utah at the time. I think Alex Smith was actually the quarterback of that team. They noted that Auburn lost, albeit by a touchdown, by the way, the year before, that they didn't want to see a rematch because Auburn had their shot at USC and they didn't win it. And I thought that was really poor logic to use. That Auburn team put 4 guys in the first round of the NFL draft and had 2 of the top 5 picks. 2, and they were at the same position. I don't know if they would have beat USC because USC was an absolute monster that year with Reggie Bush and Matt Leinart and Lindale White. I mean, goodness, they were good, Andrew. But I can confidently say, as someone who actually worked for that program and filmed every single practice and game that year there, they wouldn't have got beat 55-19 like Oklahoma did. And so I don't think they got it right that year, but it was the human bias before that they were unable to overcome. And with more scrutiny on the process, I just think, if you get a vote in what is really, I think you said it really well. I want to highlight this for our listeners. The AP has been a historic part of this process for a century. And you got to vote. It matters, Haley. And I hope that when she sits down and she reflects on what she said, that she sees that. But hey, what do we know? We're just a couple guys here on Locked On UCF, talking football every week. Andrew Gluco from UCFKnightsZone.com. I want to thank you for joining me today. Thank you guys so much for making Locked On UCF your first listen of every single day. Look, it's historic times at Locked On UCF. We've got something new going. College football fans, Locked On and Fire TV present College Football Kickoff, your ultimate college football weekly preview. Drake Toll of Locked On Big 12 leads the conversation along two-time AP Coach of the Year, Gary Patterson, former college star Jesse Holley, and Locked On's local experts. A college football preview only Locked On can do. Catch college football kickoff every Thursday throughout the season and only on Fire TV. Catch us here tomorrow on Locked On UCF.